innovation. So basically just wanted to figure out from a few different realms, from the startup ecosystem, from the legal and policy realm, from the tech companies themselves, how it is that India is approaching its how it's approaching AI in a holistic sense, from a policy standpoint, from regulations when it comes to innovation and growth, especially given that the US and EU and China to some extent are already further ahead in their journey and have crafted some policies and regulations and have a number of companies, whereas India is still unclear and we're still sort of forming and baking what our approach to policy and innovation and regulations will be. And so I think hopefully people in this room will be amongst the amongst the first of many who will craft what India's approach to AI will be. So with that, I would like to introduce everyone on the panel. So we have with us Sagar Vishnoi, who is an AI strategist and columnist with the print. The multiple publications, among them being the print, and has I think to me is like one of the foremost purveyors and monitors of AI-driven deepfakes in India. There's so many instances have been flagged to me by Sagar. I see him as sort of a chief correspondent of AI-driven deepfakes, and so that in itself is a great public service, and has worked with a number of AI companies over the years, and political parties as well, Aam Aadmi Party, BJP, and others. Then we have with us Venkatesh Krishnamoorthy, who's the country manager in India for BSA, the Software Alliance. And Venkatesh has been with them for almost 8 years now, and so it's one of the leading tech industry associations. So most of the big tech players like Google, Microsoft.
So only enterprise, but not Google.
Microsoft,
yes, enterprise software.
But so enterprise softwares are represented by BSA. And then of course we have Apar Gupta, who's an advocate and a lawyer and longtime expert on tech policy. I'll let Apar introduce himself in just a minute here. And then we have Premdutta. Do we have Premdutta on camera?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
One second. Sorry.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. No, I'm not. My computer's actually, I'm not able to come to the webcam. I'm just trying to get that sorted. I'll be doing it in a minute or so.
So is he able to talk? Okay. We'll just get started then, and then if he's able to come on, he is. So basically, my first question is if each of you could give a very brief, like 2 to 3 minute overview of the current status of AI technology in India, as well as the concurring state of policy making and regulations. So sort of both like positive developments, but also areas for improvement. If we could just start off with a brief overview, because most people don't maybe know that much about where AI is and where it's headed.
Thanks so much, Nihal, for inviting me here. India has approached some interest towards policy making and artificial intelligence, and the most prominent of them happen to be firstly the AI for all strategy, which was made by the NPIO, and then one specific follow-up paper which focused on the use of artificial intelligence for agriculture, that was led by the NPIO. In addition to that, you also have the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which a few years ago constituted different working groups that published reports relating to how India can assimilate, lead, as well as create policies on AI. In fact, there's a separate document. And in addition to that, MIT also runs an online portal on AI, where it curates primarily media and content relating to artificial intelligence in terms of the developments which are taking place in the private sector. I think in terms of clear policy by itself, there is a vacuum at present in India. And when we look at artificial intelligence as well, it will possibly be led by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. But I do foresee that it needs a inter-ministerial committee, because there will be different government ministries within their business of allocation rules, which will touch upon different aspects. It won't just be in terms of building the hardware capacity for ensuring that AI can run. If you are wanting to make a comprehensive policy on AI, then you also have to include the ministries of commerce, the ministries of environment, given that it may cause global warming, those kind of impacts as well.
Every ministry will use AI in some way, or every sector.
So today, for instance, integrated dashboard has been launched yesterday, I think so, it's reported today, has been launched by the Ministry of Agriculture, where data from farm inputs as well as climate patterns are in a consolidated dashboard, which gives 54 types of outputs, and it is reported in the press. I do not know it because I've not accessed that dashboard. So I do not know as to the accuracy of the statement, but will also utilize machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm caveating this because there is also a tremendous amount of hype which comes around the deployment of any kind of digital piece of software today, that it includes artificial intelligence.
Makes sense, makes sense. Thanks, Apar.
Perfect. Thanks, Nihal, for putting this together quite timely and relevant for the discussions that we are having. I say timely for a couple of reasons. One, of course, AI policy is being shaped by what the immediate landscape is, which is the elections. But as BSA, we are also looking at the overall tech policy flavor of the season is AI in every government, right? Japan, Singapore, US, EU, the AI Act right now. So the question on what you asked in terms of where does India stand here at this moment? So Apar did a good summary, and in fact, I was not planning to talk about the Niti Aayog piece because it's so far before, which I participated in, and I almost forgot. And that's how rapidly the AI scene is changing every few months. That's the journey so far. When Niti Aayog started talking about AI-related policy issues, and also how can they promote innovation faster, both. It was not just regulation. They were talking about sandboxing. They had conversations around a marketplace for data, fascinating conversations. We had a couple of them in Bombay and Bangalore as well. So Niti Aayog was sort of running the ship, and it wanted to release a bunch of documents and share that with different ministries. Now, how successful that endeavor has been remains to be seen. How do the ministries take them forward? So after that, a bunch of things have happened on AI. So currently active ones, as many of you know, reportedly there was an advisory that the government had issued, where the government was looking to tackle some of the questions specifically around elections, but also beyond that. It was not just deepfakes. It was also around testing of models, etc. So those are the questions that the government is trying to ask through this particular advisory and the policy. And that's gotten a lot of companies quite concerned, I would say, the manner in which it was shared, and also the kind of issues that we dealt with in the first iteration, for sure. Besides that, there is a report that's due by the principal scientific advisor. Again, that they have put together a team of people, including some private sector participants, a lot of research organizations. The report is due any moment, but of course, the elections, I think that it's in that lock phase. So it'll be good to see how India plans to use that report, and the government plans to use that report to leverage AI and figure out regulation. I wouldn't say vacuum, but yes, AI policy making is running in different directions. The main focus for the government in the last few months, what we've heard, is that the Digital India Act will have a chapter on emerging technologies, which will cover AI-related policy making. Now that we've not seen a formal draft which was tabled or put out, so we're not really sure at this stage whether that is how the direction will take after the new government comes to power, which is Digital India Act, regulating emerging tech like AI. So I want to pause there and say, that's the landscape, just a brief summary of what I see it. But I also want to point out to the fact that AI policy does not stand in isolation if you really want to leverage AI. The pillars of any good technology policy, like emerging tech like AI, will still stand on privacy, security, workforce development, skilling. All those pillars need to come into play. It is good to talk about them together. So those are also areas in which the government has to work. If you were to look at just AI policy, those are also important pillars. So in that regard, it remains to be seen how the privacy policy will be implemented through the rules. And there is a National Cybersecurity Policy 2013 update that is due sometime soon for the last 4 years. So we'll see how that also plays out. So, and yeah, many other, how does skilling and workforce development play out, partnerships, R&D. So all those are all awaiting. So lots to be done, but at the same time, approaching it cautiously, one step at a time, which I hope the government does would be good.
Makes sense. Thanks. Venkatesh.
Yeah, building upon what Venkatesh said, I think whatever happened in this month, I think there needs to be more clarity about it, and there should have been it was a lack of clarity and a communication problem from the government side. But I believe like every process, this even tech policy creation is also a evolving and continuous process. And obviously a lot of iterations will be made because talking to different regulators, holding multi-stakeholder consultations, it requires a lot of time. And I also see how the revoke of advisories, I see it as a very positive sentiment. A lot of awareness has been created among the AI companies and developers after whatever has happened, which has created a lot of conversation among them. And if that momentum is to be pushed and that can be used to create more conversations and more multi-stakeholders conversations can be created for the regulation part, I think that will be beneficial for the government to put out the new policy with the new government after July.
Makes sense. Thanks for that. So, I think I wanted to sort of roll back a little bit and maybe have a little better of an understanding. Where is the consumer market for AI right now? Before we can start talking about privacy and regulations and policy, why has India not created these policies and regulations in a comprehensive way? Presumably because the market and the demand is not in the same places, let's say where the US or EU or China is. So maybe if you could just explain a little bit for the average person day-to-day, how are their lives intersecting with AI? And only then can we then start talking about policy or regulations.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, sorry.
Please.
Yeah, so because that was there in the question and you didn't read it and when you shared those initial questions. So it's interesting to, the consumers of AI are, you could divide into a few categories. So one is, of course, the business to consumer, B2C consumer, who's directly using a particular software or for an application on their phone, right? So whether it's food ordering app, something as simple as that, to something a little more like, they're accessing government portals, paying their taxes, filing water tax and housing tax, etc. Those so that's a very direct interaction.
That's AI driven in all these cases.
So I'm just saying, so I'm building the answer in that manner. That's one area where AI plays a role. Now, how active is that in India? It's yet to be seen because there are a lot of, at that area of innovation, right now, we have a lot of experimentation that's happening by the companies purely because of that interaction is quite fluid. The data that you have is still not robust. So you're still gathering more data from consumers and you're trying to understand, hey, how can we repurpose what we offer to them in a better manner? when you have examples, so let me take something sophisticated, healthcare, right? So you have a lot of AI already being used by the consumers indirectly through the aegis of a hospital, or so whether it comes to automating a lot of billing, processing, scheduling of doctors, and those are areas where innovation is happening, and often they don't get spoken. So that's I was just talking about how the consumers use it. That's one aspect. The other area where it's not yet robust, but it's playing out in India is also, like, say, skills sectors like manufacturing, which is not directly consumer facing, but it's used by an enterprise business, which is where our products come in. So a lot of the design that maybe, say, for example, you would do in Bangalore or Hyderabad for an aircraft engine or something would use AI. I mean, they have always been using AI. They would continue to use AI even today. Nothing changes. GE or these big companies who are looking at using AI to develop an engine, their centers are global centers of excellence, and engineers today are using AI. So in that aspect, I would say they are different. The uptake on the enterprise side has been always there for a while, but now it's on the ascent. Very layman's classification. On the consumer side, I think we're still at very, very early stages for multiple reasons, both the supply side and demand side. So compute power, we don't have enough of it as of now. That's another discussion that keeps happening. Like, how do you get the compute power that you need to run massive LLMs? And then something simple like, can you recommend a better book for, can the algorithms predict? So that for that you need language processing, NLPs, better algorithms for all of it. So that's the landscape. It's very nascent in both. I would say enterprise, because of the historical reasons, it's a little ahead compared to global, with consumers at very nascent speed.
And so, Apar and Sagar, would you agree that that is the reason why on the policy and regulatory side, we're also in a very nascent early stage, because there is not that much demand from consumers, whether it's enterprise or everyday? Is that sort of the reason that we haven't made it that far, policy and regulatory wise?
I think there is a high amount of interest right now in artificial intelligence, and it's not only occurred after the launch of GPT 3.5 to the public. In fact, it predates that. So depends how you define artificial intelligence. If you take vision recognition technologies within it, such as facial recognition, there have been large 100 crore deployments which have been occurring in states over a period of time. It has been used
over decades, as I mentioned.
Yeah, it's been used by different public authorities, even for the purposes of some local body elections, by state election commissions for voting. And if you look at content moderation, then takedowns, in fact, the overwhelming majority are happening through artificial intelligence. And of course, then you have generative AI as well. Now, I don't think so there is a lack of deployment of artificial intelligence or its use or how it's impacting us today. But what actually, Nihal, is much more concerning to me is the lack of an express intent, that given that if you acknowledge that this is something which is very revolutionary, is going to impact society in very different ways, okay, economically, politically, socially, it's going to alter power relationships, it's going to impact the world of finance. Why are you not asking different government ministries to actually look at and craft AI policies from the subject matter that they look at from the business of allocation? In fact, if you look at the United States executive order, the Biden order, which has been issued, he does not say we have all the answers. He says we know some things. These are our principles. Let's define what is machine learning, etc. But he says the different regulatory authorities within the federal government need to look at AI and report back what we should do. So I think I think what's important is when you recognize something is very important, is actually to task people and tell them, let's work on a plan. Is it actually impacting? Is it actually going to impact employment? And the reason I think this does not happen is because there is not enough scrutiny of the union government, because it's sufficient for a government minister to come on a panel to say some things and get reported in the press. You don't go back and you check on it. And the principal fault for that is essentially resting on all of us as citizens. We are not questioning the government. That you said Digital India Act 2 years back, where is it today? We are not questioning the government, for instance, to a higher degree of scrutiny when the first two advisories came on artificial intelligence, right? What is your plan? Is our advisory even legal? It only peaked when you got the March 1st advisory, okay? And then those illegal practices came in. I think the other explanation is the historic lack of capacity in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Now, its budgetary allocation has increased over the past 3 years, but if you look at it, it is still not a full-fledged cabinet ministry. It's almost seen as an appendage to the Ministry of Communications, Telecommunications, and this is there from the UPA era, right? It was originally a ministry under appendage to the Ministry of Communications. For instance, you may remember Kapil Sibal having it as addition to one of the other ministries, and that is continued in NDA 1 and NDA 2 today. Okay, and what you do notice is that the unfortunate outcome of that, it's not viewed as a ministry which is independent in a sense of having a very senior cabinet minister. Seniority, both in the sense of political as well as financial allocations, being able to drive policy. So, unofficially, you know, what's the ranking? The Prime Minister, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Defense. Okay, where is the Ministry of Technology, Ministry of Electronics and IT figuring it? Fairly low, right? So that's why I think they're not being able to drive this agenda. So it's an unfortunate, I think so, reflection of several historic reasons, but also much more recent trends.
Understood. So I guess, you know, if there are some uses in agriculture, in manufacturing, but on the consumer side, like basically, what are the ways we've talked some about AI-driven deepfakes, but other tangible ways is the average person's life being affected by AI right now, either positively or negatively? I don't know. We can start with you, Sagar, and then maybe go back.
Yes, I think
Because it's only based on that that people will speak up and say, oh, we want policies on this, or we want, right? Because they have to feel that effect themselves in some tangible way first.
true. One of the example which comes from, like, I come from the intersection of politics and tech, and one of the very good example where everyone is consuming is AI-based content, which is being made like in seconds. You can create a lot of AI voice clone of be it PM, be it any political leader, and everyone is consuming it because for the like satirical purpose, for the entertainment sake, it has reached every nook and corner of villages in the country.
AI-driven content.
Yes, and everyone is watching it, and they are having fun. Like, okay, like no one knows these are like cheap fakes or shallow fakes, and no one bothered to care about what is the definition of deep fakes and cheap fakes are. But they are getting entertained. They know that okay, this leader is dancing along with another leader, and this is artificially made, but the emotion behind it, okay, this is for the fun purpose. Where okay, I'm watching it again. They are watching it reel or any short video on the same platform or another platform. Through this, their lives are getting affected, and they are consuming a lot of AI-based content. I think this is one particular thing where their lives are getting affected, and they are consuming a lot of. Whether if you talk about like other B2C brands or other companies, if they are going to sell people their products, they may be hesitant. They will be a bit apprehensive. But what they are seeing is they have already thought it out. Okay, this is being made by someone sitting in some company just for the entertainment purpose, or by the platform itself just for the entertainment purpose. So I think that consumption level is at another level.
Okay, so it's mostly content that
Yeah.
you're seeing on different social media.
Correct. And that too specifically political content.
Ah, mostly
Yeah.
political content. Okay. Anyone else have anything to add on tangible AI use cases that are affecting people's lives right now?
I mean, so one, Nihal, I mean, I'll take the liberty to say, okay, it's basically, if you could, that's one way to think, like, you know, how does it affect the user, the consumers right now, and then make policy for it. So that, to some extent, is what we advocate, like risk-based approach, right?
Yeah.
Framework, right?
Correct.
So world over, we are seeing this as a preferred approach where you identify where the areas of high risk could be potentially.
As the US model.
Yeah, US, EU, even not just those governments, even the Indian government is also like actively considering it through DIA discussions, etc. For a simple reason that it's impossible for you to look at all of AI out there because it's like ubiquitous, right? It gets integrated into every, I mean, you're on the phone trying to drive through the city, you have G maps, you're using YouTube. I mean, that starts something as simple as that. You go pay your credit card bill. You know, it's at every phase that you get something like that. So it, in terms of, yeah, so I would say that's the risk-based approach. So I'm happy we look at it that way.
The opposite is just for everyone's knowledge. The other approach is a rights-based approach, right? So a lot of the EU AI Act is a rights-based approach, and so that is in a contrast to the risk-based approach, which
I mean, I wouldn't put it one against the other. The reason why I say that
are just different approaches. Yeah.
In terms of, so when you look at privacy, it's both are integrated, like in the EU, even in GDPR, right? So you have the rights-based approach is enshrined into the GDPR, no doubt, but it still follows risk framework assessment, etc. Right? So in terms of, to answer your question, I think very little. So first, because of this time we are in, the impact of misinformation, disinformation is quite significant, and people, you had reports on, of course, famous actors, but even others who complain that they feel intimidated by some of these videos that are put there. So you have to take all of that into consideration because people are not feeling that sense of safety, right, and that security that comes from being online. I mean, so fundamentally, that is a dominating aspect, right? So it is one, but it is one of the important aspects of people not feeling safe to put themselves out there and trust the online or digital media. So definitely, I think the focus should be on that as well. Importantly, misinformation, disinformation, to come out with what are the harms that might cause from that. Define harm. What do you mean by that? So I think those are questions that are still being asked. So like that's one area. The other area, I mean, I'll just take an example, is what Apar used. Like we don't have studies or any proof of what's happening, whether it's affecting people, but fines due to webcams, CCTV footage. A lot of it is automated. I don't know whether that's AI driven, but it is automated, and you get a fine on your phone if you're driving. I drive a car, so I'm challaned, for a lot of. Now the question is, what is the process involved? Who's the vendor along the value chain? Is the government's procuring, maybe AI from somebody, maybe the hardware from somebody, maybe the software from somebody. So how would you figure out whom to assign responsibilities? But here also there's a potential for, like you said, harm or to the users, because they would be served the notice, a court order if they had against the law. Right? So so that's another intersection where users could be sort of harmed. So these are potential areas, but each area is important, I would say. The other area is also like, if there are programs where you're using AI, not from the government perspective, in the private sector, using AI to scan resumes, tools to then shortlist candidates, right? Hopefully it does not promote any form of bias or discrimination.
Is that already happening in India at any scale?
I mean, I'm not sure about scale, but I can't help but imagine that if you're using those tools, bias and discrimination is a part of how we operate, and you could, of course, transfer it into AI.
But I mean, is that being used for hiring? Do we know of, I don't know, Monster or Indeed or others scanning users based on an AI algorithm and selecting? Is that happening?
I don't know about I don't know about the specific examples, but the tools are out there, right? So I don't know whether Monster is using it or tools, but the tools are out there. There are companies using these tools. It's like not a US or EU. It's active in India. Now, the change could be that the human in the loop example, like you would not just put everything on that AI, but you might also have it to say, okay, from the 10,000 applications, shortlist it to 1,000, and then you use somebody to filter it. But yeah, the question is pertinent. I don't have an answer for it. Like, how much AI does it use?
Yeah.
Does it just use automation? Does it just like, scan certain aspects, cut paste, or does it like have a memory?
Does it have a certain intelligence?
But yeah, these are global tools today. You can go just buy this stuff online, and they're all available. Right?
Understood. Makes sense. Makes sense. I think we'll move over to. Oh wait, no. Prem. Yeah, to Premdutta. Yeah. So if you could just briefly introduce yourself, and then you obviously work with AI startups, so maybe you could tell us about your experience. How are consumers, how are users being affected by artificial intelligence in a tangible way right now?
Yes, yes. Firstly, thank you for having me. Yeah, so apologies, I can't be there right now personally because my flight got delayed. But anyway, point being, so I'm from Avantari. We are a startup from Hyderabad, and we also do a lot of AI tech primarily, and we have done work in the elections with AI. In the first generation, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, to the AI that we have today is obviously something completely different in that sense. Now, what I like to say and touch upon primarily is that safety and regulation is very important. Number one, I'd say that regulation is crucial for us to thrive as a business in the future, because that will allow us to have what we can have in the future. And it's primarily very crucial to us because it will support us and allow the industry to grow in that aspect. That's the way I look at it. Secondly, in terms of regulation, India as a country, as I've heard a lot of you speak, completely resonate, and I feel the same thing, is that we do require regulation, because with regulation only can we go ahead and can we do all the other things that we can. And in terms of deep faking has come to another level actually, because of how the platforms are going about it in today's day and age. I'd say it's only going to probably get worse without regulation. And yeah, in India per se, I feel that yes, when you're talking about the IT minister or the IT department, yes, we should have someone who is not only a seasoned individual but also understands tech in a very profound manner in that sense. So in terms of regulation and all of these other things, we will probably have a very solid outcome from that. Yeah, I think that's the way I look at it.
Understood. Thanks, Prem. So I'll take it back to So we've talked about a few bills, the Data Protection Act. We've talked about Digital India Act. Of course, we have the AI advisory that's come out. Besides content moderation and deepfakes, which we've already had 2 panels on, and I think we've had plenty of good ideas and solutions. Outside of content, is there any other major risk coming with AI right now that we need to be thinking about and tackling? And do these 3 legislative frameworks, and some of which are passed, some of which are in the works, are they sufficient for tackling all the risks that AI can pose in the coming 1 or 2 years?
So I think there seems to be a lack of recognition sometimes how broad the term artificial intelligence or machine learning is and how it is then used in public systems. I think most prominent use, the most widespread use of AI in terms of how it will impact the largest number of Indians will be its integration in welfare services. At present, welfare services are being digitized and they are matched to the entitlements of the beneficiary on the basis of biometric based technologies, which do have exclusion issues which are continuing over a period of time, right? Now, it is only natural for this digitization to also eventually include some elements of AI-based processes, and I think it will pose risk. The second thing, which I think there's an inadequate amount of embrace within wider policy discussions beyond content moderation and generative AI, is something I touched on already, which was vision recognition and how it's integrated as mass surveillance technologies, which are not only surveillance in the sense of being passive systems in which you need to go back and then check the identity of a person who is within that field of view, but also an active sense of spying on that person's movements through the course of their entire day. I think these are 2 important conversations or policy issues which possibly should find greater amount of inclusion within the larger issue of discussion of AI. And here I think when we think about principles, either they may be the principles which have come from the G20 statement of digital public infrastructure, or we look at the OECD principles on AI, they will equally apply to these two use cases.
Understood. And so maybe if you could just give us very, very briefly, which are the vendors or the companies which are providing the service for AI within our social security services?
I don't know, that's for a journalist to find out.
Okay, I wasn't sure if this is already public
No, I said
information.
it very clearly. This was a natural progression of what would happen.
Oh, what would happen?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, it would, and same with the surveillance.
No,
That has already happened.
yes.
Okay.
And there are documented research studies. There are companies such as TACU, etc., which have been well covered by the Indian press.
Okay.
So I can't report on facts. I'm not a journalist.
No. I just wanted examples for people to be aware of at the back of their head. But Venkatesh.
Yeah. So Nihal, I mean, in terms of areas where you would address risks, I mean, so the whole
And whether the three frameworks we have right now.
Yeah, right. So I think the whole whole idea is to proactively mitigate risks so that you can leverage the technology in the best possible manner. I think that should be the goal of the government. Whether all the risks have to or can be addressed through potential regulations, that in itself is questionable for me. For example, I'll tell you an exercise that we did at BSA a couple of 3 years ago on. So we put out a risk management framework. Okay, so the way you can develop a software, right? So the software life cycle. So if you look at the software life cycle, mimicking the AI life cycle, which is another interesting area of discussion, is you have the design stage. So you go see a real life scenario or a scenario and say, here are the boundary conditions based on which I could design a software. They are designing the software. Then you get into the development part of the life cycle, and then finally deployment. So you have to look at risks in all these three stages, and we came out with a framework for figuring out how to do something like that. It's industry code which can be adopted by any industry. And NIST also, we work with NIST to put something similar. NIST put out a framework as well. So it's just a framework. It's not a regulation. But a lot of the developers, deployers today are fighting or beating the market to develop, launch products. It's very tough to look at developing code in all these stages. But sooner or later, companies realize, hey, we need to backwork and start working it purely because our results are not, accurate, or it's going out there and governments are complaining. So they are realizing that this is automatically happening in some instances. So one of the things the industry has sort of come about, at least globally and even in India to some extent now, is to figure out how do you look at secure coding, how do you look at this holistic approach, right? So simple thing, right? So red teaming, that's a phrase that gets thrown around on how you develop AI, how do you design a particular software. So that just means that, can you have two teams work on the same project and see what results come out from different teams. And surprising results come out because you just staff the team differently. You put a lot of engineers in one team, you get a different answer. If you put engineers or maybe social sciences or people from arts and humanities background, you might get a different answer. So I think those are questions that industry is, of course, asking. It'll be tougher for the government to understand or ask those questions, but proactively, those are also areas that you can work, maybe through industry bodies. I know the Data Security Council of India also looks at similar frameworks for coding, etc. So will the three frameworks address? I'm not really sure whether they will address all the problems, but they will address some of the building block issues. You have to also add to it like things like open data, which is still under discussion in the NDSAP policy. So those are areas, but it's also a lot of it is also through industry designed practices, frameworks. I think those are also good starting
outside of the
yeah, outside.
Yeah, makes sense. And so shifting gears a little bit, Sagar, I know you have a lot of experience with the political parties. So I'm curious, we've seen, a use of AI driven or cutting edge technology driven holograms, which I know Premdutta has created and worked on.
Yes.
And I know you work with parties. What role is AI playing within the political parties right now, and what role is it playing by them within this upcoming election? If you could give us some, paint us a portrait, give us some examples of how the parties themselves are using it in various forms.
Sure. So it's like many of the parties don't have exactly, like they are out of pockets understanding to spend on AI products. They do have a lot of money, which came out of from the report of electoral bonds, of course. But of course, they know the result. That's why many of them are not ready to spend, right? Understanding the parties and political leaders are different entities. So political leaders or the member of parliaments are those who are winning. They want to have a bigger margin. So yes, understanding they want to get highlighted from the upper leadership. They want to try out few new products and they want to get highlighted from the leadership. And those who are losing, they know it, of course, that we are losing the game. So they don't want to spend much, whether it's older products or like AI products. Now, when we talk about AI products, yes, of course, like there was holographic technology which was used by Premdutta and his father, and like firstly around 2012 and then 14 as well. Now it has made things a lot of easy. One of the use case, if I tell you, like there is one AI conversational call. Earlier, what used to happen, survey used to take a lot of months, and it will take around a lot of money as well, and it will take around a lot of budget as well, right? So after that, for the communication problem of the political leaders during election campaigns, call centers solve this problem, understanding, but they also increase the human resource problem, right? Now through AI, you can do a survey of like 1 crore or like 10 crore people in a day or so, and you can track it on a dashboard, which has made this particular problem of getting feedback from the people, getting to know what is going on in their constituency or in their particular state, pretty easy.
You're already doing that now.
Yes,
AI-driven dashboards with crores,
same tech can be used for getting to take feedback of the welfare schemes by the government, right? As Apar said. So yes, they are using it like, and that has provided them productivity. That has like cut their cost by like 50 times what they were spending earlier on surveys and getting feedback. So it has provided them edge like this. Now getting into another use case, like it can be emotional analysis of the users. Now where comes the privacy part, right? So a lot of users will be watching a particular speech and they will be, their webcams will be open and the survey will be done. And through this, the emotional analysis of the users will be done, like what was the high point, what was the low point, where they felt happy, sad, hopeless. And that's how they are going to track, like, okay, through this point of the speech, people felt like this. And this can be done even in the live rally as well. So like when they are, where they are like 5 to 10,000 people, this can be done in a live rally through facial recognition system, right? So that can be done for the speech analysis, of course, for the leader, and emotional analysis, how the users or the viewers are feeling, right? And of course, when we talk about the AI communication part, there are so many tools, like there is personalized tools, right? You can get a video message with your name on your WhatsApp, right? And there is one more thing, like a holographic thing can be done where they can talk to you one-to-one, just getting inputs from you, like what's your name, what your age is, and what you do, and they will throw the messaging according what data points you have provided, right? So they will try to make you feel more personal, more relatable, and more accessible. So I think
Absolutely.
right, and I think that's
100%,
how like,
I agree with you.
you must be aware of these products, right? So that's how they are trying to make people feel more relatable, manipulate their emotions, and of course cut their cost.
So what would you say? Are we seeing the effects of these tools, whether it's whether it's through surveying or through trying to persuade? Are we seeing effects of these new cutting edge AI technologies that these parties? Are we seeing the effects of it within the election right now? Can we see it being used out on the campaign, and are there risks or rewards that we can see from it?
Yeah, like, which is of course like journalist part to find out, like, and
I mean, if I can second that, yes. I'm sorry to butt in, but yes, for sure, I can second that, and I can tell you about it as well. If you'd allow me the time. I'm sorry if I was cutting you off. Sorry.
Please go ahead, Premdutta.
Yeah. So the one thing I want to really mention is that the reason these kinds of tech are employed is because one leader can't go out and meet all of his voters that are there. Let's say if there are about 5 lakh voters for one constituency, he can't go and meet all 5 lakh people at the same time. Although he'd like to, he'd like to maintain a relationship in that sense, because that is what every political leader tries to do. So these tools are basically made for them to go and reach all those voters that he can't actually personally meet. Number one. Number two is, when he's able to go and do this, he's also able to get the feedback, which is exactly what you're talking about. That feedback is very important. For example, we did a campaign in 2018 called Selfie with CM campaign for Mr. Naveen Patnaik. Now, at that time when we did that, we had, through AI and through actually AR as well at that time, we had Mr. Naveen Patnaik go to individual houses within villages, Naxal prone areas, and various other places, and go into the house, and they would actually able to take a selfie with them on the spot. Now, if that person did not want the CM to enter their house, then you would automatically know whether they were beneficiaries of the cause that they were working for or not. And this information was very crucial for the party, because they would know whether they're going to win that seat or not. Secondly, what went wrong, so they will not make the same mistakes the next election. So yes, to second that point, these techs have been employed primarily for leaders to go and meet and reach out to their voters, which they'll never be able to probably meet. Yeah.
I see, understand. And do you see any potential risks or pitfalls or concerns with the ways in which parties are using cutting edge AI to reach voters, and ramifications, whether it's surveillance or it's privacy or it's unfair persuasion?
Right. No, actually I don't, because you can't make an AI, you can't make a hologram, or you can't make an AR, augmented reality, of a leader or of a politician or of any human being without their consent. Number one. Number two is, when you're doing it, when you speak of regulation, they already give you a certain set of regulations that you have to abide by, which are the rules of that leader, how he has to look, his image, certain things, the kind of clothes he wears, all of these things. These things are very integral, because that is not only the image, but the person and themselves. So you have certain set of regulations, you have certain set of guidelines that you have to follow. And yes, you're only permitted to do it within that extent. Now, in terms of deep faking and all these things, yes, I second you on that, because in this day and age, everyone can do something with the help of, if you have Midjourney or you have ChatGPT or all these things, right? Because the AI algorithm inside is feeding content, and through that content, so you can make all of the other things. Yeah, that is a little dangerous, because it does happen without consent. But regulation is only for that. In terms of politics, I don't really see it, because no politician is going to allow you to make a deep fake of him, while you're able to do it. And you have to have their consent. Second of all, you have to have enough content to be able to make the machine, program that and make that algorithm for it to work as an artificial intelligence itself. So yeah, that's the way I feel.
Understood. Thanks, Prem. So
Yes.
come back to you, Apar and Venkatesh. What do you see as the most significant ways AI is currently being deployed within the election? And is there anything from that you're particularly concerned about in the country?
I'm not following the present elections that actively. So I don't know how AI is being used in the present election.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. Like, if the question is like, how is it being used in the elections? I'm not sure about it either.
I just
Sagar, maybe a good question for Sagar.
Yeah, which is just weighed in on. So I just wanted to also give you guys the chance if you had anything to add. So shifting things a little bit, the Indian approach to AI, as we've discussed, is still sort of being built, it's being created. If we're to try and peek around the corner, the EU has its EU AI Act, the US has the Biden executive order, and there may be legislation coming from Congress. China has its own black box, tightly controlled model. where do we see India going as it adopts its approach to risk and reward, innovation and regulation, whether it's going more towards the US, which is more of a free market, risk-based approach and allow growth to happen, then we'll regulate, or EU's regulate first approach, more rights-based, or China, which is just a sort of authoritarian whenever it risks it impacts the party or national security or peace, then it'll crack down. Where do you see us going as these three other models have emerged?
So I think a lot depends, Nihal, on the outcome of the election, not in terms of who comes to power, but who is the cabinet minister who gets charge of the ministry. That's the first thing, and that will determine mighty, and whether there's a so the prime minister has already asked ministries to make a 100-day action plan. So there seeming to be some level of continuity amongst the NDA-2 and the NDA-3 government, which I anticipate to come into power after elections. So I think after that, we'll have some term of clarity in terms of the timelines and the regulatory instruments which will be adopted, whether there will be soft instruments like advisories, which is more like a threat, right? Send to 8 parties that do this, otherwise we can pull the intermediary liability rug from under you. There can be FIRs which will start popping up in Muzaffarnagar, in Yamunanagar, etc., places like that. Okay, that's one category itself. But I think broadly in terms of AI policy, I don't think so it will come through because let's just go by the talent kind of thing, things which have been there for a long period of time to continue or in equally large amount of period of time, unless there is an outlier event which happens, right? So I think so, it depends. If the Prime Minister wakes up one day and says, "Kuch bada karna hai," in a cabinet meeting, so things will happen. Otherwise, the underlying trends are such, let's not go towards the EU, let's just wait and watch, because their incentives are essentially creation of X number of unicorns in Y number of days. That gets them there. Yes. And right now, what's happening is that a lot of the VC funds in India, they have stopped deploying their cash. They are under extreme pressure from the LPs to deploy the cash. And all of this has stopped because the internet growth story in India has stopped for the last 2 years, which people are not putting an eye on. Right, and also there are corporate risk management issues in a lot of Indian tech companies, right? They are possibly billing their own chacha under fake GST invoices. Okay, so the primary issue which is happening right now, and the interest is the growth of the digital economy. The number of internet users, those are those system incentives in which you can show X amount of billion dollar valuations for companies, new AI companies in India. And how will you do that if you have a policy climate which is seen as very restrictive? So I think the lack of capacity as well as a huge amount of pressure on the ministry, given what's been happening over the past 1.5 years, to create a favorable investment climate will restrain it from coming out with rules which are very, very severe. And this happened in public display on 4th of March. If the right venture capitalist quote tweets our minister, he will roll back the policy. There will be no nationalistic murmuring there.
Even if a generative AI model like Gemini has badmouthed the Prime Minister, even then we will roll back.
Yes, get Mark Attisi to quote tweet the minister, it will roll back. Take it from right. If AZ Partners does it, if 2 or 3 others do it, it will happen. Take it from right. That's the reality.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Wow.
So, huh?
Yeah, who was it? Who quote tweeted them?
I don't know. It must be one of these Vinod Khosla, one of these guys.
Oh, there was also Pedro Domínguez, that Premdutta. He called it that we don't know about whether we'll reach singularity, but Indian government is approaching.
Yeah, so see, the thing is, the way Nihal, I think you understand the incentives are only in terms of timelines. It is a wait and watch approach. India is repeatedly saying in its data protection and technology regulation, we are not going to look at the United States. We are not going to look at Europe. In fact, we are also not going to look at China. We are going to adopt a middle path. Now, what is this middle path? What are these two competing values between which you are walking? It's not defined.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at, is this middle path that you described, but I guess, I don't know if anyone else would wager to give an educated sense of what this middle path will look like.
In terms of where it's, two parts to my answer, where it's going, where I want it to go.
Sure.
So first part is where it's going. I would take a natural progression from what we've left off with. I think the Digital India Act has to be looked at, purely because the IT Act, which is an important piece of legislation which we've all been working with for the last 2 decades, many of us have participated in multiple iterations of amendments to it as well. It needs a relook for reasons, because technology has changed. The whole aspect of having one catch-all phrase to define all the participants in the ecosystem as intermediaries is getting outdated. We are seeing that. So a whack-a-mole approach is being followed right now, which is come out with many sort of advisories. So from a policy practitioner and an analyst perspective, the way that I'd say that we have to update that document, right? And then then there's a lot of ramifications or consequences of updating of behemoth legislation, right? Which means that we have to go through training, awareness, law enforcement. There are many aspects to all of that. So if you update the IT Act and call it the DIA, a chapter will come under AI, emerging tech, out of which AI would be a part of it. So it is going to be that much, right? So that's the only piece of, so it might resonate with some aspects of what Apar mentioned, which is to say that it might not be the EU way. We are not going to come up with an AI Act which runs into recitals over recitals. Bear in mind, even the US, it's just an EU, right? Because it's tough to get legislation passed through the houses there. For the foreseeable future, maybe also, right? So anyway, so I think the questions that are being asked internally is I think how can we leverage these technologies to spur growth? Because would it become something similar to what we missed out in the semicon wave, etc., right? So I think those are parallels that are often drawn, which I hear. Now I don't verify whether they are accurate, but we are catching a wave after 30 years, right? So yeah.
Can I just add one thing which came to my mind? It's an outcome from a previous roundtable. So a lot of the AI companies also, because they happen to be big tech platforms, will push for exemption for liability for the output which comes from generative AI. Okay, so they're going to broadly say they're covered by Section 79 of the Information Technology Act. And all we need to do to avail that safe harbor immunity from any kind of liability for anything ChatGPT spits out or Gemini spits out is that we take it down or we change the user output after a government department notifies us that this is illegal under the IP. So I think a holding structure may be devised because there is an interest by large generative AI companies to essentially avail that immunity and clarity. And yes, there is always an interest in government to extend the IP rules to a new area of regulation. This may be a holding position which we may come at for some period of time, but again, Nihal, I'll go back to it. There is a high amount of unpredictability on the path ahead. I think if things change, they may change very quickly in the first few weeks of government, or we may be having a stalemate which is much longer. Yeah, like Venkatesh is saying, a chapter in the Digital India Act.
So that's what I was aware of in all my participation in government public consultations meetings, that this will be looked at through the Digital India Act. So I just go down that path. So that is in terms of like what you said, crystal ball gazing on where things might go. In terms of what I would want to see is continue to look at 3 or 4 areas. So number one, international interoperability. The reason why I mentioned that is in every story, whether it's the iPhone story or whether it's hardware plus software, India is a part of the global value chain. So you are sooner or later going to integrate in that system. So that is point number one. So ensure interoperability internationally. Number two is reduce risk through policies, no doubt, Government of India policies, but also through industry interactions, like what I mentioned, risk management framework. So some of the bodies like TEC, the Telecom Engineering Center, are already in that journey. So, guidances from various ministries might also come out saying, hey, here is what we think you should do to reduce the risk. They'll come out from TRI, TEC, and other bodies maybe, right? So, so that's another area. So reduce risk, figure out how to do that in different ways. Define terms, like how do you interpret terms that were mentioned in the advisory? So what do you mean by discrimination, bias, in what context, so I think those have to be discussed with the industry. 3, 4, workforce development, R&D. The best way to figure out, solve challenges is to invest and figure out solutions. It's not going to come from anywhere other than, figuring out joint collaborations, partnerships, whether it's with Japan, Australia, China, whether it's within. So those are 3, 4 areas which we would want to see. And the final aspect is, it would be helpful if these processes are undertaken in consultation with the stakeholders. It is very tough to get something and then respond to it. It's doing a big challenge because we're not sure what problem we are trying to solve when we respond. We've had this issue with the certain guidelines earlier.
Makes sense. Great. So I think we'll move on to just closing remarks and before we wrap up. So basically my question is, if we can keep it to just about a minute or so, what is the most promising element of AI in India and what is one of the most concerning things about AI in India? So if we can all just end on this one note, we'll start with you, Premdutta.
So I believe, as what I've heard, I just heard it as a rumor. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard that Jio is now coming up with a platform called Hanuman, which is going to be the first Indian AI platform like the ChatGPT of India. So I'm very interested to see that, because when you have big players coming in is when regulation is very necessary. And number 2 is it's definitely going to happen. Without it, I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm talking about big players in AI. I think it's going to happen, and India is going to have their own AI platform for themselves to use and to explore and only to go ahead. Deepfaking, I'd say, is something that's going to be not really going to happen in terms, because regulation is probably going to stop that from happening to some extent at least. So yes, this is the way I think it's going to go ahead. Yeah, in India.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Premdutta. Sagar.
I think the scale which India has, I think it looks to me very promising for the AI companies and even for developers, where they can scale a product to millions and billions of users. The concerning thing for me is, of course, data, the kind of biasness it has, and the underrepresented groups it lacks, like women, like few caste, and of course the minorities. So it will be a very concerning thing, whatever AI training is being done on their data. I think it's a lot of concern on whatever current models we have. Data is the biggest concern.
Thanks, Sagar.
Yeah, so from my end, the challenge, first, I would echo Sagar's view in terms of the opportunities. AI works with the volume of data and being able to make models from that. By design, we have a lot to offer with respect to that. So in a sense, it offers an opportunity to test out models, figure out what's the way forward. So that's an opportunity, not just for the companies, but also for the government as well, right? So just like, how do you create those solutions? How do you create a policy framework for those solutions? So that's one. In terms of downsides, it's also, the flip side of the same opportunity land is the risks involved in terms of, how do you evaluate and look at those risks when you define something like bias, when you define something like discrimination. The context will be very different for the landscape here. Now, Apar's comments something on how does the government look at the whole of a government framework, somebody looking at it from a macro lens to come and say, hey, here is the path forward. So that's going to be very complicated. If we have piecemeal regulations and sort of whack-a-mole approaches, that might not help. I mean, the technology will grow, but it does not grow in a sustainable manner that promotes innovation. It might not get us to the right place.
Understood. Thanks, Venkatesh.
I think there's tremendous opportunity for economic growth through use of more artificial intelligence. That's because India does have a fairly mature startup ecosystem. There is a very high level of ambition which matches that ability. And there is the availability of capital here to build out things. I don't think so in terms of computing power, but at least in terms of trying to build models as well as building companies at some point in time. I think India has that capability. In terms of risks, Nihal, I wonder about artificial intelligence as being the answer for being posed as an answer for questions which are much more deeper in our society, because technology has been a galvanizing force for increasing inequality in India. I think so. It's rather than bridging the distinctions which are there between primarily different economic groups, in fact, increase them. So early access to technology results in a very different outcome in terms of social mobility for a person who has a smartphone by themselves, as opposed to a person who shares it with other members of their family. So I think it's very, very important that when we talk about technology which is very different from network-based communication, which was the first wave of social mobility, economic growth, and that India story. And certainly, there are millions of people in India who benefited from it. I think similarly in AI, what you will notice is that there will be a large number of people who will be in our metropolitan cities who will benefit from it, but they may benefit to an extent that it increases the inequality between them and the people who still do not have basic internet connection. So I think there needs to be a broader recognition that there will be a growth in inequality by the broader use of artificial intelligence as well.
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. I think that's a good balanced note to end things on. We'll take maybe just one or two. Is there any questions in the audience at all? Sure. Well,
from a governance perspective, we talked about independent tech policy, sovereignty. Surveillance is an issue that comes up a lot, and AI is obviously very central to mass surveillance. Do you guys have any comments, particularly Apar, who's been professing a lot of democratic values in defining these policies and laws? Do you have any large comments or high-level comments on what's already being done and what can come up? And a classic example was pre-election. We all got that WhatsApp message from under the name of the Prime Minister. And of course, that's not an example of AI per se, but increasingly a lot of data is coming together under the government. And with models getting deployed, it's very easy that even basic AI will start allowing for more control and centralization of power rather than democratization.
Yeah.
Would you want to offer any nuance to that? And do you see how we can advocate against that? Is the only way out then to vote against it, or is there a middle path?
There is no middle path. We have quarter fever, okay, and that fever will go away in time. I think so. I hope so, unless it destroys the body completely. So that fever is here. The vote percentages for BJP have been rising from the 80s. They have been going up. Okay, Congress has been declining. There are new late capitalism frameworks which are built. Corporations are becoming bigger. So it will correct at some point in time. I think so. Okay, that's because I have hope that that our problems are too big that they can't be solved through such a martial, aggressive, destructive attitude that you are with us or you are against us. So I'm a big believer in the liberal frameworks of the world order as much as they have it genuinely. Okay, so I think there will be a return to a certain degree of consensus-based policy making, and there will be checks and balances which will come into place. But I do not think so they will happen right now. And I have reasons for that. You just go to any press release by the Ministry of Electronics and IT, especially by Minister Chandrasekhar, the first two sentences have actually a prayer to the Prime Minister. Every third line says it, every end of sentence, he doesn't end it with a punctuation. Okay, he ends it with the name of the Prime Minister. And you have this in totalitarian societies. And we are not recognizing it because right now you have a sense of growth in the technology sector. People are doing well. They are making lots of money. So might as well enjoy your life, go see a movie. Okay. That's the kind of thinking we have.
Economics has taken over from the right.
Yeah. So people have switched off, but the thing is, I think there will be a return to normalization. Because, see, if you look at the first trend, which I think, which is very concerning, is that I think teleconnectivity through mobile broadband has peaked. They need another policy to jumpstart it again. After we reach 800 million to 900 million, it's hovering there. It's not going beyond, which means that your entire engine, which was fueling the entire technology sector, has somewhat stopped. The second is that the market which you have of the affluent is becoming more affluent, but there you have less number of people with more disposable income, which is being found actually in also. So there are multiple things. I can get into a very long discussion with you around this, but basically surveillance-based reform, if it happens, if you've read the local CSDS report, happens by people who lack power in society, who fear the police officer, who demands hefty bribes from them. Not from people who can negotiate very easily their way out of surveillance. For us, surveillance actually is a sense of being in which we are kept safe from the people who don't have money as much as we have, who don't have resources. We like surveillance. Okay, we like that sense of power. So we are actually accessories to that entire system. So I don't think so. Surveillance reform is something we are looking at in the near possibility anytime soon.
But you see it as a real threat, if I may.
Yeah, I work against that. Yeah. So, but the thing is that you have to work.
Not an increasing threat is what I mean.
Yeah, but it's not like you will get a lecture.
Not
A chief minister of this this city is in jail right now. So let's talk about reality. What is the reality right now?
Priorities.
Thanks for that. And any other last questions? Going once, going twice, going thrice. Thanks, everyone. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.